Hey guys, thanks a lot for watching. Please like, subscribe, share and comment. So in today's video I wanted to talk about epigenetics. So epigenetics is a scientific revolution that happened in the 90s and noughties that I feel most of us haven't heard about. I also wanted to see how it fits in the context of the nature-nurture argument. So let's get started. Enjoy the video. Thanks a lot. So first, I wanted to talk about the nature and nurture argument and the history behind it. This debate revolves around whether human behavior is decided by our genes or our environment. The phrase, in its modern sense, has been coined and popularized by Francis Galton, who's the half-cousin of Charles Darwin and the founder of the modern eugenics movement. So for those who don't know, I'll just quickly explain what eugenics is. Eugenics is the idea that the quality of the human race can be improved by excluding certain people judged to be inferior. While eugenics principles have been practiced as early as ancient Greece, the contemporary history of eugenics began in the 20th century, when a popular eugenics movement emerged in the UK and spread to many countries, including America, Canada, and most of Europe. In this period, many countries adopted eugenics policies, prohibiting certain marriages and forcing sterilization on groups of people, from minorities to differently abled individuals, LGBT community, criminals, and people who scored lower on the IQ tests. Eugenics became associated with Nazi Germany when the defense of many of the defendants of the Nuremberg trial attempted to justify their human rights abuses by claiming there was little difference between the Nazi eugenics program and US eugenics programs. In the decades following World War II, with more emphasis given to human rights, many countries began to abandon their eugenics policies, although some Western countries continued to carry out forced sterilizations. We're looking at you guys. Since the 80s and 90s, with the development of assisted reproduction technology, concern has grown over a possible revival of a new, more potent type of eugenics. A common criticism of eugenics policies is that they're easily susceptible to abuse because the genetic selection criteria are controlled by the group in power at the time. Furthermore, eugenics policies eventually lead to a loss of genetic diversity, thereby resulting in inbreeding depression, which is the reduced biological fitness of a given population as a result of inbreeding, due to a loss of genetic variation. Another criticism is that eugenics policies propose to permanently and artificially disrupt millions of years of evolution, and that attempting to create lines clean of disorder can have far-reaching effects to the genetic ecology, including negative effects on immunity and on species resilience. Heredity had been observed for millennia, but in the 19th century, Gregor Mendel was the first to study genetics specifically. DNA was first isolated in 1869, and its molecular structure was first identified by Francis Crick and James Watson in 1953. What they found was that the DNA molecule was carrying genetic instructions for the development, functioning, growth and reproduction of all known organisms and many viruses. That seemed to be the nail in the coffin for the nurture side of the argument. The DNA molecule is composed of two chains that coil around each other in a double helix. Each chain is composed of one of four nitrogen-containing parts: C, G, A and T. C can only pair with G and A with T, so both strands store the same biological information. This information is replicated as and when the two strands separate. The human genome has approximately 3 billion base pairs of DNA wrapped into 23 chromosome pairs. As you can probably tell, epigenetics is going to be the hero of this story, and I should be getting onto them now, but we're not there yet. First, I want to talk about a hugely influential study undertaken before the discovery of epigenetics. Then we'll continue from here. The Minnesota twin family study followed thousands of twins, triplets, quadruplets, quintuplets, whatever, and they were looking for similarities. They found some incredible similarities and took them as evidence that genetics affect us even more than we thought, including our personalities. These studies, along with the discovery of DNA and the political landscape of the 20th century, appear to sound the death knell for the nurture side of that argument. Enter epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of the biological mechanisms that decide whether genes are switched on or off. So DNA gives instructions on what happens inside cells, but epigenetics decides how they're read and whether cells should produce relevant proteins. Epigenetics controls genes through both nature and nurture. For example, epigenetics is what determines a cell's specialization as a fetus develops into a baby, from skin, blood, hair, liver to whatever kind of cell. But environmental stimuli can also cause genes to be turned on or off. So let's go back to where we were and see how epigenetics fits into the picture. So let's go back to the human genome. The human genome has approximately 3 billion base pairs of DNA wrapped into 23 chromosome pairs. But how does the DNA get wrapped into those chromosomes without getting tangled? The answer is histones, which are made up of 4 proteins and act as spools for the DNA to wrap around. These histones are actually one of the mechanisms that epigenetics uses to decide which genes are expressed or silenced. They can roll up, making certain genes inaccessible and therefore inactive, or unroll, making them accessible and activated. Epigenetic factors interact with histone tails to ensure gene expression or deactivation. Things like diet, age, and environment can be epigenetics factors, but we'll get back to that soon. I just wanted to go over a few cool examples of the epigenetics mechanism. All humans share most of the same genetics, only differing in about 0.1% of our DNA. For comparison, we differ from chimps and bonobos about 1.1%. So we've seen how epigenetics can create our different organs using the same DNA, but let's take this a step further, take a look at honeybees. Queen bees and female worker bees from the same hive are genetically identical, but have very different bodies. The queen is much larger, lives much longer, and lays many thousands of eggs, while smaller workers are sterile, but have complex foraging and communication skills. What epigenetic factors can bring about this change? The answer is royal jelly. Royal jelly is a honeybee secretion used to feed larvae and used to create new queens. During the process that a hive is creating new queens, the workers construct special queen cells. The larvae in these cells, destined to become queens, are fed large quantities of royal jelly, triggering a cascade of molecular events. Royal actin and other proteins in royal jelly interact with histone tails to silence expression of certain genes, resulting in development of a queen. We've now seen how the epigenetics mechanisms activate or deactivate certain genes, and we've seen how diet can change a worker bee into a queen, but epigenetic factors are everywhere, from temperature to exposure to environmental chemicals, drugs, pharmaceuticals, or your age. I want to go over some of the interesting examples of epigenetics in Hereditary before we put it all into context. Researchers studying a microscopic roundworm discovered a set of mutations that extended the worm's normal lifespan of 2 to 3 weeks by up to 30%. An incredible discovery that could lead the way to us understanding aging in humans, but that was not the end of the story. The researchers found that the descendants of the long-lived roundworms could also live longer than normal, even if they inherited the non-mutated version of the genes. The epigenetics tags were passed on, turning off certain genes involved in aging. Epigenetics effects can even be passed on to grandchildren. Grandchildren of women who were pregnant during the Dutch hunger winter famine experienced some of these effects. The epigenetic factor of having a grandmother that was pregnant during the famine resulted in an increased risk of poor health in these people. Now on to my favourite experiment. In 2013 at Emory University, researchers proved that fear can be passed on through the epigenetics mechanisms. They conditioned a mouse to be afraid of a specific smell, the smell of cherry blossoms. They conditioned it by electrifying the mouse as they sprayed the smell into their cage. Once the mouse had learned to be afraid of the smell, his or her pups, as adults, will not only startle more than their parent would, they'll also be more sensitive for that specific smell, the smell of cherry blossoms. The researchers also undertook separate experiments, not involving odour, and showed that these mice were no more anxious in general, just of that specific smell. Mothers could not pass sensitivity onto fostered pups, but it occurs with in vitro fertilization, showing that it is not learnt through social interaction. This sensitivity also occurs in the second generation of mice. So now let's put all this info together and see where it fits in the context of the nature and nurture argument, eugenics, and this twin family study. Epigenetics should signal the end of the nature-nurture argument, because it proves that there is no nature without nurture and no nurture without nature. Genetics and epigenetics are literally entwined, as are the ideas of nature and nurture. So it's time to reassess the Minnesota twin family study, which has been called the most influential behavioral psychology experiment in the last 25 years. It is important to remember that this study was first undertaken before the discovery of epigenetics. So as I said before, this study was hugely influential, reported on with titles such as "Twins Separated at Birth Reveal Staggering Influence of Genetics," "How Genes Shape Our Personality," "Born That Way," "Are We Hardwired?" "Mean Genes," "Life of Crime is in the Genes," "Study Raises the Estimate of Inherited Intelligence," "The Gene Bomb." Even Pulitzer Prize-winning author Lawrence Wright wrote that the science of behavioral genetics, largely through twin studies, has made a persuasive case that much of our identity is stamped onto us from conception. To the extent that our lives seem to be pre-chosen, all we have to do is live out the script that is written in our genes. He wrote that in his 1997 book, Twins, and What They Tell Us About Who We Are. So what's the problem? It's a large experiment undertaken by a university, and it's reported on by many reputable news agencies. Well, I first realised there was a problem while researching this video. So the study also showed that twins who were raised together did not show these signs, did not show more similarity than any other people. So how can this be? For me, it seemed clear that the answer was epigenetics, but I couldn't find any reference of that through all these articles. So I decided to find an expert's opinion on these studies. I found a brilliant study by J. Joseph that completely debunks this study, with 22 clear reasons why we should reject the study. For me, the most damning is that the twins had financial and personal incentives to exaggerate about the similarities and not talk about the dissimilar aspects of their personalities. For example, the set of triplets involved in the studies attempted to profit from their fame on the basis of this study. The 2018 film based on their lives, titled Three Identical Strangers, show how they ended up having very different outcomes in life. Another set of twins had been close friends for over 30 years, but still counted as raised apart. There are many other issues, which I've linked down underneath, same with all my other sources, but there were also ethical concerns. They purposefully put some of the kids into bad environments to see how they would cope with a worse-off situation than their siblings. And to this day, some of the twins don't even know that they have siblings out there. For the experimenters said that it was just studying the effects of foster care, not letting them know that they were actually involved in twin studies. So what does this all have to do with eugenics? At the beginning of this video, I mentioned Francis Galton. He both popularized the phrase nature versus nurture, and also founded the modern eugenics movement. He was a white supremacist, and his intention with raising the nature versus nurture argument was to prove white supremacy. Racists clearly benefit from headlines such as "Mean Genes," "Born That Way," "Life of Crime is in the Genes," not only because these headlines help to dehumanize others, but also makes them feel like they can't change their personalities because it's told to them that their personality is in their genes. None of these articles mentioned epigenetics or the controversies behind the experiments. We've all anecdotally known people who are very different from their parents, or twins with very different personalities. Now, since the discovery of epigenetics, we can not only prove that environmental factors affect our and our offspring's health, but we now know the mechanism that epigenetics factors use to change the expression of our genes. This is bad news for ethno-nationalists and the powers that be, who I feel are the only people who benefit from statements such as, "Much of our identity is stamped onto us from conception, to the extent that our lives seem to be pre-chosen. All we have to do is live out the script that is written in our genes." I read that as, don't worry poor people, you're just living out the script of your genes. Epigenetics might be bad for ethno-nationalists, but it's good for humanity. For example, we now know that epigenetics mechanisms are critically important for diseases such as leukemia and epilepsy. As we've seen, epigenetic changes can be either inherited or accumulated throughout a lifetime, but importantly for medical research, they're also reversible. It can also help us understand the true cost of trauma. The children and grandchildren of prisoners of war in Confederate camps during the US Civil War had an 11% higher chance of dying than their compatriots. Equally, the survivors of the Holocaust have lower levels of cortisol, a hormone that helps the body return to normal after trauma, and those that suffered PTSD have even lower levels. Their offspring also have low levels of cortisol, meaning they are less likely to survive a traumatic event and will take longer to recover. The final point I would like to make is a warning. Epigenetics is a new science and there's a lot of sensationalism out there. David Gorski and Adam Rutherford advise caution. Apparently, pseudo-scientific New Age writers have been making unfounded claims that a person's genes can be improved by mind control. This is not true. So as we've seen, epigenetics has a huge sway over how the genetics inside our body are expressed or silenced. So in 2001, we finally sequenced the entire human genome. Now we know that these epigenetics factors also play a part, particularly in PTSD or trauma from genocides or starvation. Now we have the Epigenome project, trying to map all the epigenetics markers connected with certain conditions. I think at first they will start with epilepsy and leukemia, as they're definitely involved with the epigenetics mechanisms. So it's something that the future will hopefully help us without. Finally get a hold of what's actually happening in our bodies. And to anyone on the nature side of the argument, know that you're not wrong. Our genes are important, but our epigenes come with them, and so experience and genetics are who we are. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed the video, and please like, subscribe, share and comment. You can see another video here, who knows. See you later. Over and out.